The handcuffs clicked shut at 9:47 on a Friday night, not in a back alley. Oh, she going. Not in some dim parking lot at the wrong end of a city that had forgotten how to sleep. They clicked shut inside the officers' club at Naval Base Coronado, under lights bright enough to read by, in front of 40 witnesses holding drinks. They had stopped sipping in front of phone screens that had already begun recording. The woman they put the handcuffs on did not struggle. She did not argue or raise her voice. She stood with her hands behind her back as if she had done this before. Not because she was broken, not because she was afraid, but because she had learned long ago that there are moments when fighting costs more than waiting. When the machinery of truth moves slower than the machinery of accusation, and the only thing to do is stand still and let it catch up. Her name was Sarah Calloway. She was 35 years old. She worked as an EMT for San Diego County. She drove a 10-year-old truck with a cracked dashboard and a hospital parking permit hanging from the mirror. She kept her dark hair cut short and practical. She wore jeans and a plain gray t-shirt and boots that had seen better years. She looked to every person in that room like nobody. That was in ways that none of them yet understood the whole point. In the next 90 minutes, a 3-star general would walk through that door and salute her. But we are not there yet. Before the handcuffs, before the accusations, before the crowd and the live stream, and the 40 people who would spend the rest of their careers reckoning with what they had witnessed, there is a small metal disc on a chain around Sarah Calloway's neck. It is worn smooth on the edges, the way objects get worn when they have lived inside a pocket for a long time, taken out and turned over by fingers that needed something to hold on to in the hours between 2 in the morning and first light when sleep doesn't come and the mind goes places that daylight won't follow. One side bears a trident, not the standard naval special warfare trident, something older looking, stripped to its essentials. The other side holds a series of numbers and letters stamped into the metal with the plain finality of a thing that is meant to record and not to be understood by the wrong people. GU 7041201. That coin was issued to 12 people. 4 of them did not come home. 48 hours before the handcuffs, Sarah Calloway was on her knees on a wet road in the dark. A car had come off the highway at a bad angle and hit the guardrail with enough force to change the shape of the driver's door permanently. The driver was a man in his 50s, the kind of man who probably had grandchildren who had left dinner early, who had no reason to think that this particular drive home would be different from 10,000 before it. He was bleeding from a laceration on his left arm, and the bleeding was not stopping. Sarah worked without thinking. Her hands moved through the kit the way a pianist moves through a piece learned in a different decade, not from memory exactly, but from somewhere deeper than memory. She applied the tourniquet with a precision that her partner watching from 2 feet away would later describe simply as certain. Her hands did not shake. They had not shaken in a very long time. When the man looked up at her with the wide eyes of someone who has just understood that the situation is serious, Sarah looked back at him with an expression that said, "I have been in worse places than this, and I did not lose anyone I was responsible for." "You're going to be fine," she told him. She meant it. That was the thing about Sarah Calloway that people who knew her only a little noticed first. She did not say things she did not mean. It was a discipline she had trained into herself over years in conditions that made a wet road at midnight feel like a good day. She drove home at 2 in the morning. She showered and stood for a long time in front of the bathroom mirror, not looking at her face exactly, looking past it at something the mirror couldn't show. On the dresser beside her keys and a paperback left face down and half read, there was a small metal disc on a length of chain. She had been staring at the ceiling for an hour when her phone buzzed. A name she had not seen in 3 years. Emma Cole, Marcus's little sister. He would have wanted someone there who knew. "I know you can't talk about it. I know. But if you could just come." Sarah read the message twice. Then she got up, picked up the coin from the dresser, fastened the chain around her neck, and started getting ready. She had not planned to stay for the reception. The memorial service was in the function room adjacent to the officers' club at Coronado, folding chairs. A photograph of Marcus Cole on a stand at the front. The photograph showed him in desert kit squinting against sun that Sarah could still feel on her own face if she let herself think about it long enough. He was grinning in the photograph. He had always been grinning, even in Kandahar, even on the worst nights. It was the thing about Marcus Cole that you remembered first and forgot last, that wide, slightly crooked grin that said, "We are going to get through this, and it is going to make one hell of a story someday." He had gotten through Kandahar. He had not gotten through what Kandahar left inside him. Sarah sat in the back row with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the photograph and did not speak to anyone. The chaplain spoke. Two men who had served with Marcus in a capacity that could be mentioned publicly spoke. Emma Cole stood at the podium and talked about her brother as a child the way he had called her every Sunday without fail until the Sunday he didn't. Sarah did not cry. She had learned to store grief differently, not suppress it, not deny it. Hold it somewhere deep and carry it the way you carry weight on a long march, distributing it across the whole body so no single point gives way. When the service ended, Emma found her near the back door. "Stay," Emma said. "Please, Mom is here. She's been asking about the people Marcus served with." Sarah thought about her truck in the parking lot, the drive home, the paperback left face down on the dresser. "A little while," she said. She found a corner table near the windows that looked out over the darkening Pacific. She ordered water. She sat with her back to the wall and her eyes moving not anxiously, just aware. It was not something she chose to do. It was something her nervous system did automatically the way breathing is automatic. Master Chief Frank Dawson was on his third cup of coffee, which told him from long experience that it was going to be a long night. He was 52 years old and built like a man who had spent 3 decades refusing to let his body forget what it was capable of, still broad across the shoulders, still carrying himself with the posture that the Navy installs and never quite removes. He had 22 years of naval special warfare behind him, a bad knee he did not mention to anyone, and a talent for reading rooms that had kept him alive in places that didn't make it into any official account of anything. He had been watching the woman in the corner since she sat down, not because she was suspicious, because she was so deliberately unremarkable that she was to anyone who knew what to look for remarkable in exactly the ways that mattered. The posture seated back straight, weight distributed evenly using the chair not for comfort but for position. The way her eyes moved across the room in a pattern that was not anxiety and not boredom but something older and more deliberate. When the bartender had dropped a glass earlier, a sharp, sudden sound that made everyone else turn toward its source, Sarah Calloway's head had turned toward the nearest exit. Dawson recognized that response the way you recognize music you learned in a different chapter of your life. He was pushing off his barstool coffee set down, moving toward her when the situation became someone else's problem. Captain Derek Holt was 31 years old, and he was still wearing the energy of his last deployment, like a coat he could not figure out how to take off. He was physically impressive in the way that young SEAL operators tend to be the product of years of training that had not yet begun to exact its long-term cost on the joints and the sleep and the quiet hours. His trident pin was prominent on his khaki uniform. He had been drinking since 7 o'clock with Lieutenant Ryan Slade and Petty Officer Kevin Briggs, and the three of them occupied space with the ease of men who are accustomed to being the most capable people in any given room. He was not a bad man, that is important. He was not cruel by nature. He had 2 parents who loved him, a little sister named Kelsey. He would have walked through fire for and a service record that had by any objective measure earned him the right to be proud. But 18 months ago, Kelsey had gone through the female integration selection for Naval Special Warfare. She had trained for 3 years. She had passed every physical benchmark. She had scored at the top of every cognitive assessment. She had been eliminated in the final evaluation. Holt had watched his sister come home hollowed out. He had watched her rebuild herself. But something in him had calcified around the experience, hardened without his examining it, without his taking it apart to see what was actually inside. He had decided without ever saying it to himself plainly that there was something fundamentally wrong with the program, that it was built on compromised standards and misplaced ideology and the kind of thinking that endangered operators by pretending things were interchangeable when they were not. He had decided this because it was easier than considering the alternative. He was wrong. He did not know yet how wrong. When he saw the woman at the corner table, the short dark hair, the civilian clothes, the dog tags visible at her collar, the focused stillness of someone watching a room they were not comfortable in, he felt the calcification in him harden into certainty. He set his drink down. He told Slade to get his phone ready. He walked over. "Excuse me, ma'am." His tone had a surface of politeness, and underneath it, the pressure of a man who has already decided what he is going to find. "Couldn't help noticing your dog tags. What unit did you serve with?" Sarah looked up at him. Her expression gave him nothing. "I attended a memorial service," she said. "I'm not looking for conversation." "That's not what I asked." "I know." Holt stepped closer. Behind him, Slade had his phone out, the recording light already alive. Briggs moved around to her left, completing a loose triangle that had nothing accidental about it. "Those tags military issue? Or did you pick them up at a surplus store?" "They're mine." "So you're claiming military service?" Slade's voice carried the bright energy of someone who has found an audience. "As what exactly?" What was your command? That information isn't public. Holt laughed a sound that carried no warmth. Of course it isn't. Let me guess your service is classified. Too secret for us to know about. Several nearby tables had gone quiet. The momentum of the thing was building the way it builds in these situations, slowly at first, then all at once, the way a crowd decides something is worth watching. I haven't misrepresented myself to anyone, Sarah said. Then prove it. Holt's voice had climbed enough that people 3 tables away could hear clearly. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the room on his side. Give us your details. Should take 2 minutes if you're legitimate. I'm not authorized to provide operational details without proper clearance verification. Slade whooped a short theatrical sound designed as much for the people watching his phone screen as for the room itself. Operational details. She's committing to the story. He panned the camera. Live at Coronado, folks. Stolen valor in progress. Then Holt reached out and grabbed Sarah's shoulder. The grip was deliberate, invasive. It communicated that the rules of social distance no longer applied, that he had decided the situation was past the point where politeness needed to be maintained. Something happened behind Sarah's eyes. Not panic, not fear. The opposite, a rapid cold calculation, a processing of variables so fast it was over before it was visible. Dawson, now 12 feet away, 4 feet away and moving, recognized it instantly. He had seen it in debriefs and in operational contexts and in the controlled environments of training and the uncontrolled environments of actual combat. It was the look of someone deciding not to do the thing they were capable of doing. You should take your hand off me, Sarah said quietly. Or what? Holt squeezed harder. You're going to call the cops. We are the cops here. And you just confessed to, the chain snapped. Holt's grip had put sideways pressure on the necklace, and the clasp gave way, and the dog tags and the coins scattered across the polished wood floor in 2 directions. The coin hit the floor, bounced once to sound like a dropped quarter, but heavier, and came to rest near Holt's boot. Sarah's hand moved. 2 people watching closely would later describe what happened as a blur. Her hand dropping from the table to intercept the falling dog tag midair, fingers closing around it with a speed that made several observers blink. In the involuntary way you blink when something doesn't quite fit the frame of normal human movement. She caught the dog tag. The coin was already on the floor. Holt bent and picked it up. He held it under the bar light, turning it over with the confidence of a man who expected to find nothing significant and was preparing his expression accordingly. GU 7041201. He read it aloud, making sure the room could hear. What's this supposed to be? Behind the bar, Joey Reeves, 40 years old, former Navy corpsman, 6 years of pouring drinks at this club, and mostly keeping his own counsel, heard the number and went very still. His eyes moved from the coin in Holt's hand to the woman standing at the table. He said nothing. He had learned in another life that there are things you do not say when you do not have the clearance to say them, but his face said it anyway to anyone watching closely enough. Dawson was watching. He reached the edge of the gathering crowd. Holt. His voice was steady and level. What exactly did she claim specifically? Holt turned. With respect, Master Chief, this doesn't concern you. Dawson looked at Sarah. She met his eyes. A single beat of shared recognition. 2 people who had each understood something about the other that could not be explained to anyone else in the room. He stepped back. He took out his phone. He made a call from the corner, low voice, 45 seconds, a number he had not dialed in 4 years. Then he ended the call and stood quietly with his phone in his hand, waiting. At the next table, Sergeant Brett Hale, Army Ranger, 12 years and a man who had developed a professional allergy to false accusations after watching 2 soldiers in his unit lose their careers to one's, was watching the situation with the expression of someone who has seen this play before and knows how it ends and does not want to watch it reach that conclusion. He sent a single text to a contact in his phone. We have a situation at the club. Need higher authority, ASAP. Then he put his phone away and walked toward the crowd. Captain Linda Marsh arrived with 4 MPs and the expression of someone pulled away from a Friday evening that had been until this moment proceeding entirely according to plan. She was 44, ran a tight command, and had 0 documented tolerance for incompetence or theater. What she walked into was the intersection of both. Her gaze moved across the room and settled on the cluster of people around the corner table. Holt stepped forward and explained the situation with the confidence of someone who has not yet considered that confidence and correctness are not the same thing. He used words like fraud and stolen valor and federal crime. He held up the coin as evidence. He laid out the case with the efficiency of a man who has rehearsed it in his head and found it in that rehearsal entirely airtight. Marsh approached Sarah. Ma'am, identification. Sarah reached into her pocket slowly and produced a wallet, a California driver's license. No military ID. Marsh examined it under her flashlight. Sarah Ann Calloway, civilian address in San Diego. No military designation. Yet you're wearing dog tags. I attended a memorial service, Sarah said. I made no claims to anyone about my status. She absolutely did, Holt said. She talked about SEAL training, operational details. She implied, I answered questions that were directed at me, Sarah said, without raising her voice. I didn't volunteer anything. Marsh held up a hand. Mrs. Calloway, simple question. Did you represent yourself as a currently serving or former military officer this evening? I need to contact Naval Special Warfare Command, Sarah said. Major General Robert Klein. You don't get to make demands. Did you or did you not claim military service? Hale stepped forward. Captain, what exactly did she claim? Did she introduce herself as an active SEAL? Did she tell anyone she was currently serving? The silence that followed had the quality of a room catching up to a question it should have asked earlier. She implied it, Holt said. Implied is not claimed, Hale said, and wearing dog tags is not a federal offense. Did she specifically state she was something she is not? Morrison's Holt's face reddened. Marsh raised her voice. Enough, Miss Calloway. Final opportunity. Documentation of military service. Discharge papers. Anything. My service record is classified under executive order, Sarah said. I cannot produce public documentation without authorization from Naval Special Warfare Command. If that is insufficient, contact the appropriate authority to verify my status. The appropriate authority, Marsh said flatly, is me. She nodded to the MPs. Sarah turned and placed her hands behind her back before they reached her. She did it with an ease so automatic it did not look like cooperation. It looked like something else, the positioning of someone who had stood in this place before many times at the direction of people who knew exactly what they were doing. Two of the four MPs hesitated for a fraction of a second. Dawson saw it. Hale saw it. The cuffs went on. Sarah Calloway, you are under arrest for violation of federal statute impersonating a military officer. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. I understand my rights, Sarah said. I repeat my request to contact Major General Robert Klein. Slade was narrating for his live stream. Holt had bought a round for the table. The crowd was reorganizing itself around the gravity of an event the way crowds always do. They began moving Sarah toward the door. The room parted. Phones stayed up. Joey Reeves watched from behind the bar with the expression of a man who has spent 6 years pouring drinks and has not expected this particular Friday to remind him of everything he carried from a different life. And then near the door from the far edge of the crowd, a voice, thin and clear and weighted with a grief that had been running a long time. Sweetheart, Mrs. Dorothy Cole was 68 years old. She had buried her son, technically speaking, though she had not used that word because the casket had been closed, and some part of her had not entirely finished arguing with the fact of what was inside it. She was small. She wore a dark dress appropriate to the occasion. She had the face of someone who has cried until crying becomes just another form of breathing stripped of its element of surprise. She had been watching the whole thing from the far end of the room. She did not understand any of it. She knew only that this young woman had been sitting quietly at a table and something had gone very wrong very quickly. Sarah stopped. Not because the MP stopped. They kept walking. But Sarah's steps slowed by something that was not physical resistance, and for one breath she was looking at Dorothy Cole across the shifting crowd, and Dorothy was reaching toward her with one hand. Thank you, Dorothy said, for coming tonight, for being here for Marcus. He talked about you. He never said your name. He couldn't, I think. But I always knew there was someone who had been there with him. Sarah's face did something, not large, not something most of the people watching their phone screens would have caught, but Hale saw it and Dawson saw it and Dorothy Cole saw it because grief sharpens certain forms of perception. The controlled expression, the extraordinary discipline of a woman who had given nothing away for 2 hours under conditions designed to take everything cracked. Not open, just cracked the way a fissure appears in something that has been under enormous pressure for a very long time, and even the fissure is carefully managed. He was a good operator, Sarah said. Her voice was not entirely level. I'm sorry for your loss. Holt grabbed her arm. That's enough, he said. His voice had lost its triumphant edge. Something uncertain had crept in, though he would not have named it. Let's go. They took her out into the October night. The crowd settled back into itself. The drinks were refilled. Slade was posting. Holt bought another round. In the corner, Frank Dawson stood with his coffee going cold and watched the door through which Sarah Calloway had just been taken, and he thought about a call he had made and the machinery that call had set in motion turning now in the dark. In approximately 80 minutes, it would arrive. The MP office smelled like burned coffee and institutional cleaning fluid and the accumulated weight of too many difficult conversations. A metal desk in the center. 4 deliberately uncomfortable chairs. Fluorescent lights that turned everything slightly wrong, skin too pale, shadows too sharp, a whole scene given a quality that felt less like real life and more like something that would be reviewed later and found wanting. Sarah Calloway sat in the chair across from the desk with her wrists in her lap and the handcuffs still on. She had been there 11 minutes before Commander Patrick Wells arrived. In those 11 minutes, she had not moved. She sat the way she had learned to sit in the long, still hours of surveillance and pre-mission waiting, occupying precisely the amount of space required, expending precisely the amount of energy required, reserving everything else for what came next. She had been in worse rooms than this. She had been in rooms with dirt floors and no windows, and men outside who did not know she was in there and were not going to find out. This room had a motivational poster on the wall that said "Integrity above all" in a font that had been popular sometime around 2009. She read it once and looked away. Wells entered at 10:22. He was 45, carrying himself with the precision of a man who had built a career on the exact meaning of words, on the distance between what was said and what was meant, on the legal weight of specific phrases in specific contexts. He set a yellow legal pad on the desk and sat down and looked at Sarah with the weary, professional neutrality of someone who had sat across from a great many people in a great many difficult situations. Captain Marsh stood against the wall. Holt had positioned himself near the door. Sergeant Brett Hale had taken the chair in the far corner, not invited, simply present in the manner of a man who had decided in advance to say something if what happened here was wrong. Wells took Sarah through the basics: name, date of birth, occupation. She answered each question precisely and without elaboration. He confirmed that she was claiming prior military service. She confirmed that she was. You're also claiming your service record is classified. I'm stating a fact. Wells set down his pen for a moment, then picked it up. I hold a secret clearance. If your service was classified at that level, you can disclose details to me. My service requires a higher clearance level than secret. The room adjusted around that statement, not dramatically, the adjusting that happens internally in the models people carry of what they are dealing with. That would be top secret, Wells said carefully, or SCI. That would be accurate. Holt made a sound from the door that was not quite a laugh. Hale said nothing. Wells turned to a fresh page. All right, let's approach this differently. He paused. Why were you at the memorial service tonight? The question was not what she had expected. It reached through all the careful architecture of protocol and clearance levels directly into the place she had spent 12 years not letting anyone look. Sarah was quiet for 4 seconds. Not evasion, not strategy. 4 seconds of bearing the weight of a true answer before allowing it to exist in the world outside her. Marcus Cole was my teammate, she said. The words landed in the room without drama. Just the plain fact of them, the weight of them. He survived Kandahar because I did my job. He held on for 12 years after that. A pause. Last month he couldn't anymore. Wells had his pen poised above the notepad and he did not write anything. So you knew him personally, he said. I kept him alive under fire with a collapsed lung and a severed radial artery. A beat. Yes, I knew him personally. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere down the hall a door opened and closed. Hale in the corner looked down at the floor and looked at it for a long time. He was 38 years old and had been to 3 combat deployments and had sat with a dying man in a helicopter over the Hindu Kush, and he had learned in that experience, and the ones that followed, that certain sentences carry their own verification. That a collapsed lung and a severed radial artery in the context of a firefight is not the kind of detail a person invents. It is the kind of detail that belongs to someone, that was paid for. Marsh had gone very still against the wall. Wells set his pen down quietly and did not pick it up again for a moment. Holt near the door said nothing. Something had shifted in his face, not enough to constitute an admission, but enough. Sarah did not elaborate. She did not reach for the sympathy the room was, despite itself, extending toward her. She let the fact of what she had said stand on its own. Wells cleared his throat. He turned the page. He moved to questions about BUD/S training, week of Hell Week, the grinder surf torture, water temperatures. Sarah answered each question with the specificity of someone pulling from experience rather than recitation. The difference between a fact you have read and a fact you have inhabited. Hale noted the difference. Even Holt's expression against his will registered it. Then Wells set his pen down flat on the desk. Ms. Calloway, I'm going to ask you about weapons platforms. Standard configurations for naval warfare assault elements. He paused and something in his tone, formalized, sharpened. As the presiding legal officer conducting a formal investigation, I'm asking this in an official capacity. You are required to answer me honestly. Sarah understood exactly what he was doing. The regulations were not ambiguous. Direct questions from military legal authority in the context of a formal investigation required honest answers. She could decline to discuss unit designations and mission specifics. She could not claim ignorance she did not have. She could not lie. She looked at Wells for a moment, not hesitating, calculating the landing the way you calculate before a jump. Standard loadout for DevGru assault elements typically includes a modified HK-416 with a 10.4-inch barrel, she said. Suppressor, EOTech EXP S3 optic, visible and infrared laser aiming devices. Secondary is typically a suppressed HK-45 compact tactical. Wells's pen hit the floor. He did not reach for it. He was looking at Sarah with an expression that had moved over approximately 3 seconds through skepticism, surprise, and something that in a man of his professional experience was as close to alarm as his training permitted him to show. Stop, his voice had changed. Not louder, harder. Where did you get that information? You asked me a direct question in an official capacity. I answered it honestly. Those specifications are not in any open source document. They are not in any memoir or documentary. They are not publicly accessible. He stared at her. Then how do you know them? The same way I know what Kandahar sounds like at 3 in the morning, as she said, because I was there. Holt pushed off from the wall. She could have gotten that from where? Hale's voice was not loud, but it cut through the room with the precision of a man who has earned the right to ask. Name one publicly accessible source for those specific configurations. Because I'm familiar with what's out there, and I cannot name one. Silence. Holt could not name one. He looked at the floor. He looked at Marsh. He looked at Sarah, who was not looking at any of them, who was looking at a point on the wall behind Wells somewhere in the middle distance, in the specific, unfocused way of a person moving through a memory the present room has no access to. Somewhere behind her eyes, it was 2012 in the inside of a C-130 was dark except for the red jump lights, and the man across from her was checking her HK-416 with the practiced ease of someone who had done it hundreds of times and would do it hundreds more, because that was simply who he was. His name was Chief David Garrett. He was 31 years old. He had a younger sister in Georgia named Catherine who sent him photographs of her garden. He told bad jokes in the 30 minutes before every mission, bad jokes delivered with the cheerful persistence of a man who understood that laughter in the dark is a form of courage, that the ability to find something to smile at in the worst circumstances is one of the things that keeps human beings from becoming something less than human. He checked the suppressor mount with 2 fingers, checked the optic, handed the weapon back and said something in his low, easy tone, and Sarah said something back, and he laughed too loud the way he always laughed, completely genuine. 3 weeks later, on a narrow street in Yemen, an IED detonated under the vehicle David Garrett was riding in. There was nothing to check it after that, nothing to hand back. Sarah returned to the room. Wells had retrieved his pen from the floor. He wrote something, stopped, wrote again. Ms. Calloway, he said finally, I want to be direct. You have demonstrated knowledge you should not possess if you are, as has been asserted, a civilian with no legitimate military background. You have described physical injuries consistent with combat wounds. You have now provided classified weapons configurations and claimed you possess that knowledge through legitimate service. He set the pen down carefully. That means one of 2 things. Either your service record is classified above my clearance and everything you have told me is true, or you have obtained classified information through unauthorized means and built an elaborate supporting narrative. A pause. In either case, this situation has moved beyond a stolen valor investigation. Yes, Sarah said, it has. Give me someone who can verify your claims. Any name I can call right now. Major General Robert Klein, Commanding General Naval Special Warfare Command. Marsh spoke from the wall without inflection. You're asking us to contact a 3-star general at 11 o'clock on a Friday night to verify the service record of a woman arrested for impersonation. He'll take the call, Sarah said. How could you possibly know that? Because he's expecting it. The silence that followed was different from the silences before it. Heavier, more specific. The silence of a room that has been moving towards something for an hour and has just arrived at a place where moving towards it and confronting it are the same thing. Wells opened a laptop. He ran Sarah's name through the personnel database with methodical efficiency, typing for 5 minutes, reading the results. No record of Sarah Calloway in the BUD/S graduate database, he said. No record in NSW personnel records accessible at my clearance level. No record in SEAL community databases. He looked up. As far as the system I can access is concerned, you have never served. The system he can access, Hale said from the corner. Excuse me. That's a statement about the limits of your access. It is not the same statement as she never served. Hale's voice was patient and deliberate, the voice of a man making sure a distinction he considers important is not lost. JSOC personnel files, special mission units, compartmented programs above SCY level. Those are not in the database you just searched. If she was part of something above your clearance commander, she would not appear in your search regardless of whether she served. The knock on the door came before Holt could respond. An MP leaned in. Commander, there's an NCIS agent here. Says she needs to be part of this. The special agent Karen Macy was 36 years old, and she entered the room with the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who have spent years in rooms where what is visible and what is true are only occasionally the same thing. She was not large. She carried her authority the way experienced investigators carry it, not as a performance, but as a condition of being present. Her eyes moved across the room in a single sweep. They did not linger on Holt or Marsh or Wells. They moved to Sarah with the directness of a compass finding north. And then they moved to the desk and to the small metal disc sitting on its corner. The coin. Macy crossed the room and picked it up. She turned it over once. Her fingers tightened around it, the only thing she could not entirely control, that slight involuntary compression, visible only to someone watching for it. Hale was watching for it. He filed it away. Where did you get this? She asked Sarah. Issued to me, Sarah said. May 2011, completion of a classified operation. Operation designation. 041. Macy was quiet for 3 seconds. I need everyone without essential investigative function out of this room. Now. Her voice was professional and absolute. That includes you, Captain Marsh. That includes you, Lieutenant. She looked at Holt with an expression that contained no hostility and no warmth, and communicated with complete efficiency that his presence was no longer a matter for discussion. NCIS has jurisdiction over federal crimes involving military personnel. I am assuming control of this investigation. Marsh's jaw worked. Agent Macy, this is my arrest. Was your arrest. Macy did not look at her again. Out. They went. Holt last throwing a look at Sarah that had changed character over the course of the past hour. Less certain edged with the first faint and unwilling awareness that he had made an error of a size he was not yet ready to measure. The door closed. Macy sat across from Sarah and opened a laptop with a different interface from Wells's, more layers, different authentication, the kind of system that does not appear in publicly documented inventories of government software. She typed. She read. She typed more. 7 minutes of silence. She closed the laptop. Commander, she said, how much do you know about Naval Special Warfare Group 7? Wells answered immediately from reflex. There is no Group 7. NSW is organized into Groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, and 10. Correct, Macy said. It doesn't exist. She paused. There was, however, a unit that operated under that designation between 2009 and 2013. I cannot describe its mandate in this room at your clearance level. What I can tell you is that Ms. Calloway's service record exists. It is classified well above your access. The coin on your desk is authentic. And if you do not release her from custody immediately and contact Major General Klein, you are going to cause an incident that ends careers. She let that stand. Starting with yours. Wells looked at Sarah. Sarah looked back at him with the expression she had worn since the handcuffs went on, the steady, extraordinary patience of someone who had never doubted what the ending was going to be, who had simply been waiting for the machinery to finish moving. He stood. He reached for the handcuff key. The hallway outside had filled in the minutes since Marsh and Holt had been cleared out. Word travels in a military facility, the way it travels in any closed community, faster than it should along channels that appear on no organizational chart. Joey Reeves had followed the group from the bar. Lieutenant Colonel James Whitfield, the Marine liaison who had first examined the coin at the officers' club and said nothing, stood against the far wall with his arms folded and the expression of someone who has confirmed a suspicion he had been hoping was wrong. Frank Dawson stood near the door, his coffee cup from the bar still in his hand, long gone cold. Wells led Sarah into the hallway, And that was when Holt, who had been waiting in the outer office with the desperate energy of a man who is committed to a position and cannot yet bring himself to leave, it shouldered past the cluster of people in the narrow corridor. It was deliberate. The shoulder check was not accidental. It was the last act of a man who had not yet accepted what was being written around him, a final physical assertion of contempt against the one person in that building who had done nothing to deserve it. Sarah stumbled against the door frame. Her sleeve caught on the protruding corner of the metal door bracket. The gray t-shirt tore at the shoulder seam with a soft, ripping sound, and her right shoulder was exposed. The hallway went silent in the way hallways only go silent when something has changed everything in them. The tattoo was impossible to miss. A Navy SEAL trident rendered in black lines with a precision that spoke of someone who had paid for it with something other than money. Not decorative, not approximate. Exact the tattoo of a person who had earned the right to every line of it and understood what each line cost. Below the trident, 3 letters, GU7. Surrounding those letters in a perfect circle, 12 5-pointed stars. 4 of them slightly different from the others, the ink a shade lighter added at a different time and with a different weight behind them. Joey Reeves breathed one word through the hallway window. Ghost unit designation. He said it the way you say a thing when you are not certain you are allowed to say it, but the alternative is a silence that would be its own kind of wrong. Frank Dawson set his coffee cup down on the nearest flat surface. He stood straight. It was not a conscious decision. It was 22 years of training expressing itself through his body before his mind had authorized the movement parade ground, straight chin level, weight even. The posture of a man who has recognized something that demands recognition. He looked at Sarah Calloway at the torn sleeve at the coin. Wells had not yet returned at the 12 stars and 3 letters, and the trident that had been earned in the specific way things get earned when there are no witnesses and no records and no acknowledgement that any of it ever happened. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was not steady. In 22 years, very few things had made Frank Dawson's voice unsteady. The hallway was frozen. Holt stood 3 feet from Sarah, and the color in his face had undergone a change that had nothing to do with the light. He was looking at the tattoo with the expression of a man watching the ground shift beneath him, the specific look of someone understanding in real time the dimensions of how wrong they have been. Then from the far end of the hallway, from the direction of the main entrance, footsteps, more than one set, moving with purpose. Not hurrying there is a pace that authority moves. At that is faster than a walk and not quite a run. That communicates, I am not panicked and I am not slow. And I know exactly why I am here. And this was that pace. A door opened. Night air came through for a moment, cold and carrying the smell of the Pacific. And a voice aged with command, sharpened on 30 years of situations that had required exactly this quality of precision, came down the hallway before the man himself appeared. "Where is she?" Nobody answered. Nobody needed to. Major General Robert Klein had already seen her. He was 58 years old, and he walked into the hallway with the economy of someone who stopped wasting motion long ago. Behind him, the base commander moved with the discomfort of a man who has understood that events have exceeded his ability to manage them. Behind the base commander, Lieutenant Colonel Whitfield, who had made the call that brought this man here, stood with his hands clasped and his eyes on the floor. Klein walked down the hallway. People moved out of his way the way water moves around a stone, not dramatically, not with any visible effort, simply inevitably. He passed Holt without looking at him. He passed Marsh without looking at her. He passed Wells and Macy and Joey Reeves. He stopped in front of Sarah Calloway. He looked at her. Really looked the way you look at someone when you are not managing an audience, when the performance has been stripped away and it is simply 2 people and a history that cannot be explained to anyone who was not part of it. Something moved through his face. Several things in rapid succession. Recognition. Something that might have been relief. Something that was unmistakably pain, or close enough to pain to be indistinguishable from it in a man who had learned to carry pain without showing it. He came to attention. Slow, deliberate, absolutely precise. He saluted her. In a hallway full of military personnel who had spent years understanding what it means when a 3-star general comes to attention in front of someone, the room understood. Sarah Calloway, still in the torn gray t-shirt, wrists still marked from the handcuffs, 12 stars and 3 letters and a trident on her exposed shoulder, standing in a fluorescent-lit hallway at Naval Base Coronado at 11:47 on a Friday night, could not return the salute. Her hands were still in front of her from where Wells had been moving to remove the cuffs. She met his eyes. And something happened in her expression that had not happened once in the entire preceding 90 minutes. Not when the handcuffs went on, not under the interrogation lights, not even when Dorothy Cole had reached toward her across the crowd. The extraordinary discipline she had maintained through 2 hours of false accusation, humiliation, and forced exposure cracked open. Not dramatically, not with tears or collapse, just open. The way a door opens when the right key is finally used. Briefly, completely, and in a way that everyone present would carry for the rest of their careers. "General," she said, her voice was not entirely level. "Permission to speak freely." Klein lowered his salute. "Granted." "It's good to see you, sir." His composure cracked too, just at the edges, just enough. "The honor," he said, "has always been mine." He turned. "Get those handcuffs off her," he said to Marsh. "Now." The handcuff key shook in Marsh's fingers. She was a 44-year-old MP commander who had put restraints on people in the dark and in the rain, and in situations where the people in question had strongly preferred otherwise. Her hands did not shake in those situations. They were shaking now because of the vertigo that arrives when the ground beneath you reveals itself to be a different ground entirely, and your body registers the shift before your mind has finished processing what caused it. The cuffs came off. Sarah brought her hands around in front of her and looked at her wrists. There were marks where the metal had been. She rubbed them once, then let her hands fall to her sides. Klein turned to face the hallway. "For those present with appropriate clearance," he said, "I am about to provide information that does not leave this facility. For those without clearance, consider this an official briefing under national security protocols. Any disclosure will be prosecuted to the fullest extent available to me, and I will make it my personal business to ensure that prosecution is thorough." He looked at Slade with an expression that required no elaboration. "Am I understood?" A chorus of "yes, sir" moved down the hallway. Klein looked at Holt. Then he looked away with the deliberateness of a man who has decided that a person does not yet deserve the full weight of his attention, that there are things which must be established before that accounting begins. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a coin, worn smooth on the edges, a trident on one face, numbers on the other. Identical in every detail to the one that had been confiscated from Sarah during booking and was sitting on the corner of Wells' desk in the interview room 20 feet behind them. He held it up so the hallway light caught it. "This coin was issued to 12 individuals," he said. "They participated in the most highly classified naval special warfare operations conducted between 2009 and 2013. These individuals operated under a unit designation that officially does not exist and has never existed. They conducted missions in denied territories locations where United States military presence could not be acknowledged, could not be supported, and could not be extracted if things went wrong." He let that sit. "They did this with a success rate and casualty ratio that remains to this day unmatched in the operational history of naval special warfare." The hallway held its breath. "Ghost Unit 7, 12 operators. 4 did not come home." He looked at Sarah. Petty Officer First Class Sarah Calloway served in that unit from 2009 to 2013. She was the unit's primary explosive breacher and combat medic. She participated in 17 classified operations across 4 theaters of operation. He paused, "including Operation Neptune Spear, May 2nd, 2011. Someone at the back of the hallway breathed a single word, not loud, barely audible. But in that silence, it carried the weight of everything it meant. "Bin Laden." Klein did not look toward the sound. Holt's voice came from behind Klein's left shoulder. It was a different voice than it had been 2 hours ago in the officers' club. The confidence had drained out entirely, and what remained was something reaching for solid ground. "But there were no women on that mission. The team composition is documented. There were no officially lieutenant." Klein's voice did not rise. It changed in texture, became the temperature of metal, cooled with precise deliberateness. "Officially, there were no women. Operator Calloway's presence on that operation remains classified under executive order, as does the presence of her unit, as does everything she told you tonight that you did not have the clearance to hear and did not have the judgment to stop demanding." He walked to Wells' interview room, opened the door, took the coin from the corner of the desk, and returned to the hallway. He stopped in front of Sarah and held it out. It sat in his palm, worn small, the 12 stars barely visible in the corridor light. She looked at it for a moment, then she took it. Her fingers closed around it with the familiarity of something returning to where it had always belonged, and she pressed it once against the center of her closed fist before putting it in her pocket. No one in the hallway said anything. They did not need to. Everyone present had just watched a small object complete a journey from a corner table to the floor, to a pocket that had no right to hold it to an interrogation room desk, and finally back to the only hand with any claim on it. The journey had taken 91 minutes and had cost more than anyone in that hallway could yet fully reckon. Klein continued. He spoke about Marcus Cole, about the Kandahar ambush in August 2012, about a collapsed lung and a severed artery, and the three men Sarah had kept alive until the medevac arrived, about 12 years of holding on, and the month when the holding finally failed. He said these things with the flatness of a man reading from a record, and each item landed with a weight that the clinical language could not disguise. The reason Operator Calloway was in this building tonight, he said, was because Marcus Cole was her teammate, and operators attend their teammates' memorials, without announcement, without any expectation of recognition, because that is what operators do. He turned to face Holt directly. The hallway contracted. Everyone became aware of the distance between those two men and what it held. Captain Holt, Klein's voice was very quiet. Quietness of that specific kind is more severe than volume. You publicly accused a decorated combat veteran of stolen valor, in front of 40 witnesses on a live video stream. You grabbed her. You broke her property. You had her arrested, handcuffed, and interrogated for the better part of 2 hours. You did all of this on the basis of assumptions you chose not to examine and a wound you have never properly addressed. A breath. You have 5 seconds to apologize to Operator Calloway before I begin the formal proceedings that will end your career. The 5 seconds were the longest in the room that night. Holt turned to Sarah. His face was pale. The expression on it was not simple. It was the expression of a man who has been required to revise an understanding he held with absolute certainty, and the revision has cost him something he cannot yet fully measure. There was shame in it. Underneath the shame, something raw, the look of a man beginning to understand that the wound he had been carrying about his sister, about the integration program, about who belonged and who didn't, had never actually been about those things at all. He had needed somewhere to put a grief he couldn't name and had aimed it for 2 years in exactly the wrong direction. "Ma'am," he said, his voice was hollow, empty of everything but the fact of what he had done. "I'm sorry, I didn't know." Sarah looked at him steadily, not with satisfaction, not with anger. With the same economy of expression she had brought to everything tonight, giving the moment exactly what it required and nothing more. "No," she said, "you didn't, and you chose not to find out." She let that stand. "The next woman you meet who claims military service, give her what you didn't give me tonight. Not your belief, just your patience. Long enough for the truth to catch up." She held his gaze for one more second. Then she looked away. Klein delivered the consequences with the same quiet precision. Holt formal review board discharge proceedings within 72 hours. Slade letter of reprimand, immediate reassignment. Briggs 6 months suspended, mandatory retraining. Marsh resignation accepted. Wells transferred to Norfolk JAG Ethics Committee review. Each person said yes, sir, and began dealing with what the next weeks would require. The hallway emptied by degrees. Dawson approached Sarah last. He had been standing against the wall throughout Klein's address, upright, in the precise posture that had snapped into place involuntarily the moment he saw the tattoo, and he had not fully come out of it. "Ma'am," he said, "I should have moved sooner. When Holt first—" "You called it in," Sarah said. "That's the action that changed what happened tonight. Everything else is weight you don't need to pick up." Dawson looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once in the way of a man accepting something he would continue to argue with privately for some time. The medical examination was brief. An attending physician checked her wrists, assessed the old injuries, took vitals. Elevated blood pressure. He noted it without drama. 48 hours minimum, he said. No strenuous activity. "I have an EMT shift tomorrow night." "Not anymore." The safe house in La Jolla was a small cottage on a quiet street 2 blocks from the ocean. Klein cleared the rooms with the thoroughness of habit, showed her the communication setup, and the panic button confirmed the NCIS perimeter. He stood at the door before leaving. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll be back in the afternoon." After he left, Sarah stood in the center of the living room. She took the coin out of her pocket and sat on the couch and held it in both hands and looked at it. The worn edges, the 12 stars, the trident that meant everything and could be shown to almost nobody. 4 of those stars had been added after the others, after Kandahar, after Yemen, after a water insertion gone wrong, after a street in Pakistan where a man named James Mitchell had stepped into the path of something meant for her. She pressed the coin between her palms and closed her eyes. She did not sleep that night so much as drift. Her mind moved through the evening in fragments, Wells's pen hitting the floor. Klein's composure cracking at its edges when he said, "The honor has always been mine." Dorothy Cole reaching across the crowd with one hand. She was still drifting when the knock came at the door. 7:15 in the morning, October light coming through the windows at the low angle of early autumn, making everything look provisional. Dorothy Cole was 68 years old and was wearing the same dark dress from the night before. Small, the face of someone who has cried until crying becomes ordinary. She had driven to this address because General Klein had given it to her, and she was standing on the doorstep of a safe house in La Jolla because there was something she needed to do before she could begin the next part of her life. She did not say anything. She opened her arms. Sarah stood in the doorway. She was not someone who moved easily into being held. 12 years of operational discipline and managed distance and the careful architecture of a life built around self-sufficiency did not yield to an embrace without something to push through. But Dorothy Cole was not a stranger. She was Marcus's mother. She was the person who had called across a crowded bar at the worst moment of the evening and said thank you for coming with a simplicity that had reached through all of Sarah's defenses and touched the thing underneath. Sarah stepped forward. Dorothy held her, long and steady, the way you hold something you have been waiting to hold for a very long time. She did not speak. The holding itself was the sentence, the acknowledgement, the gratitude, the shared weight of a loss they had each been carrying alone and were now briefly carrying together. Sarah let her arms come up. They stood in the doorway of the safe house in the October morning light, and Sarah felt the coin in her pocket against her hip, and she understood that this, not the general salute, not the charges dropped, not any public vindication, this was what the evening had been moving toward all along. Two people who had both loved the same man, finally in the same room, finally allowed to say so. Neither of them counted the minutes. Her phone rang that afternoon. Unknown California number. Sarah Calloway. A woman's voice, professional and careful, and underneath the carefulness, something raw and barely managed. My name is Catherine Garrett. I'm David's sister. General Klein gave me your number. Sarah went very still. David Garrett, Chief Petty Officer, Ghost Unit 7, Yemen 2012. Ms. Garrett, she said, please. We always knew David was part of something he couldn't talk about, Catherine said. Her voice steadied itself by degrees the way voices do when people have decided that the thing they need to say is important enough to get through regardless of the cost. He told us the less we knew, the better he could focus on keeping the people around him safe. We believed him because that was exactly the kind of thing David would say. A breath. General Klein called us today. He told us David was your teammate. He told us what happened in Yemen. That David put himself between you and the device. That his last words were, get her out. The cottage held very still around her. For 15 years, Catherine continued, my family has had a flag and an empty explanation and a grief that had nowhere to go because we didn't understand what we were grieving. We knew it was important, but we didn't know who he was protecting or whether it made any difference. It made a difference, Sarah said. The words came from somewhere beneath the operational training and the professional composure from the place where the truth about specific things lived and could not be managed or mediated. He died protecting someone who went on to keep others alive, Catherine said. Her voice had changed, the rawness in it, shifting into something adjacent to peace. Grief finally given a shape it could rest in. That means everything to our family. Everything. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. He checked my weapon before every mission, she said. Every single time. And he had a bad joke ready every time. Didn't matter what was coming or how bad the intelligence looked. He always had a joke. A pause. I should have told him that the jokes were what I counted on. More than the training, more than anything tactical. The fact that he could still find something to laugh at in the dark. He knew, Catherine said. People like David always know. They just don't need to hear it to keep doing it. They talked for a long time. Catherine told her about David as a child, the decision he had made at 9 years old without a parent prompting to serve, and how he had never questioned it afterward. The way he genuinely could not hold a grudge for longer than 48 hours because he couldn't see the point. The bad jokes, which were evidently a lifelong trait, and not, as Sarah had sometimes suspected, purely a performance for the team's benefit. Sarah told her what she could, not operations, not specifics. The texture of it, the way David moved through difficult situations with a steadiness that made the people around him steadier, the way he had an instinct for when someone needed the joke and when they needed silence, and never in 4 years got it wrong. When they hung up, the cottage was the same as it had been before the call, but something in it had changed. Sarah sat on the couch and put her face in her hands. She cried for David Garrett, For Marcus Cole and the crooked grin in the memorial photograph, in the 12 years he had held on with everything he had until everything ran out. For the other four, the names she had carried in the sealed part of herself for 12 years, unable to speak them to anyone who didn't have the clearance to hear them, unable to grieve them properly because grief requires acknowledgement, and acknowledgement required the truth, and the truth was locked behind classification levels that almost nobody held. She did not try to stop. She had learned eventually that the grief you refuse to let through does not disappear. It waits. And the longer it waits, the more the keeping costs. She let it through. After a while, she slept. Real sleep this time, the kind that comes when something held at distance for a very long time has finally been allowed to arrive. Klein came back in the afternoon with coffee and a folder. He laid out the situation. Holt's review board had convened that morning and moved faster than standard timeline, accelerated by a public relations situation that had no good solutions. Discharge proceedings were underway. Slade's video was being scrubbed from platforms with varying degrees of cooperation. Marsh's resignation had been processed. Wells was arranging his transfer. The 60 Minutes request, Klein said. No. Their producer made a compelling argument to you, Sarah said. I understand why. The answer is still no. She paused. Unless, Klein waited. There are 3 women currently in BUD/S first phase. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. Brewer, Holloway, and Nash. 2 of them are thinking about dropping out. She looked at Klein. If I do the interview pre-approved questions, final footage review, nothing classified, I want them in the room when I record it. Off camera, not as symbols. In the room hearing it directly from someone who has been where they're trying to go. Klein was quiet for a moment. Done, he said. The interview took place 1 week later in a secure conference room at Naval Base Coronado. The producer had done her homework and knew how to make agreed-upon questions feel like genuine discovery, how to give the illusion of spontaneity within carefully negotiated limits. Sarah sat across from her in plain civilian clothes and answered with the precision she brought to everything, honest within the bounds of what could be said. The things that could not be said she did not say, and she did not apologize for not saying them, and somehow that calm refusal made the outline of the unsaid things more present than explicit description would have managed. When the producer asked what she wanted people to understand about women in special operations, Sarah was quiet for a moment. I want people to understand that the women going through BUD/S right now are not asking for a different standard, she said. They are asking for the same chance to prove themselves by the same measure everyone else uses. They are asking to be judged on what they can do, not on assumptions about what someone who looks like them can do. A pause. And when they succeed, because some of them will succeed, they deserve to be recognized as operators, not as female operators, not as symbols or experiments or evidence of anything, as operators, because that is what they will have earned. When the cameras finished, 3 young women came into the room. Maya Brewer was 26 years old, built lean and solid with the look of someone who has been in first phase long enough for it to have taken everything soft out of her and replaced it with something harder and more specific. She had bruises on her forearms she had not bothered to cover. Behind her were petty officers Diane Holloway and Kristen Nash, wearing the same careful economy of movement, the same look of people being tested in a way that does not end when the training day does. Stop calling me ma'am, Sarah said before any of them spoke. I work for a living. The old joke landed with a slight, relieved exhale of people who have just been told what register to operate in. The hardest part, Sarah told them when they had been talking for a while, is not the physical. Bodies adapt, that is what they are built for. The hardest part is the isolation. You are doing this inside a group of people, and you are still in the most essential way alone in it. They have each other in a way that 2 or 3 people cannot replicate. Not because they are better people, but because there are more of them, and the shared experience of numbers creates something that smaller groups cannot duplicate. Maya said, how do you get through it? You become so undeniably good at what you are asked to do that the question of whether you belong stops being a question anyone can maintain with a straight face. You make yourself indispensable to your boat crew. You become the person they want next to them when everything goes wrong. She paused. And then the part nobody tells you, you support each other, not secretly, without apology, because the 3 of you completing this together is not a compromise. It is the mission. Holloway asked, does it ever stop, the having to prove it? Sarah considered that honestly. Not entirely, she said, but it changes. At some point, you stop needing it to stop. You stop needing the room to agree. You know what you've done, and knowing it yourself turns out to be a different kind of enough quieter than what you imagined needing, but it holds. Before they left, Sarah pulled Maya aside. Your mother is proud of you, she said. She cannot tell you that directly, but she is. And for whatever it is worth, so am I. Not because of what you might do, because of what you are already doing. Every day you stay is evidence. Maya's jaw worked for a moment. I won't quit, she said. I know, but I needed you to hear that from me, face to face, not through a screen. The 60 Minutes segment aired 2 weeks later. 22 million people watched. Veterans organizations cited it. Comment sections, not ordinarily places where the better qualities of human nature concentrate, where in this instance mostly one thing moved. Holt issued a public statement from wherever he was managing the consequences of his discharge proceedings. It was by any measure thorough. Whether it was enough was not a question Sarah spent time on. The media moved on, it always does. The next crisis arrived as crises do, with complete indifference to the previous one, and Sarah Calloway's face disappeared from the front of things and returned to the background where it had always been more comfortable. She went back to driving the EMT truck. Her supervisor confirmed her schedule without comment and treated her exactly as he always had, which was precisely how she preferred. She saw Dr. Patricia Sinclair on Tuesday afternoons. Sinclair was 50 years old and had known Sarah for 7 years, knew the general shape of what she carried in the careful, nonspecific way that patient confidentiality requires. She had watched the arrest video with an expression she described to no one. She sent a text the night the 60 Minutes segment aired that said only, I am very proud of you. See you Tuesday. On a Tuesday in November, Sarah arrived for her appointment and found a note on the waiting room chair. She made it. First woman to complete first phase, mentioned you by name. Thought you should know before the news cycle gets hold of it. Sarah read the note twice. She folded it carefully and put it in her pocket next to the coin. The SEAL graduation ceremony in December was held on a cold morning, winter light, through high windows at a low angle that made everyone look like themselves rather than like a version assembled for an occasion. Sarah arrived early and stood at the back against the wall in civilian clothes identical in their plainness to the ones she had worn the night of the arrest. Klein appeared beside her at some point, no announcement. Simply present the way he had always moved through spaces that required his presence. He was in civilian clothes, too. They watched the proceedings together without speaking for a while. Maya Brewer sat in the front row with the focused stillness of someone who has arrived at the end of a very long road and has not yet decided whether to believe the arrival is real. The bruises from first phase had faded. The set of her shoulders they carried something installed by months of being tested at the exact edge of what was possible, and it would not come out. It would simply become part of the architecture. When the moment came for the pins, the room went quiet with collective attention. The senior enlisted pressed the trident into Maya Brewer's collar. Maya did not flinch. Sarah reached into her pocket and took out the coin. She held it in her closed right hand, the worn edges, the 12 stars, the weight of what it represented and what it could never be allowed to represent publicly. She thought about Marcus Cole and the crooked grin, about David Garrett and the bad jokes in the red-lit dark before the jump lights went green, about the 4 stars that meant something different from the other 8 added later in grief as acknowledgement of a debt that could never be fully paid. She thought about what it meant to carry something the world cannot see and keep carrying it anyway, not because there is a reward, not because anyone is watching, but because the carrying itself is the point. Because some debts are paid in the same currency they were incurred. Because the only people who understand that are the ones who have been to the specific places where that understanding is acquired. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. 6 words. GU7. Package requires delivery. 48 hours. The recall code. 3 people in the world still alive knew it. One of them had just used it. Klein was watching her face. He had developed over 30 years of command, the ability to read what needed to be read in the expressions of people under pressure, and what he was reading now was not what he had hoped to read on this particular morning in this particular room. She showed him the screen. He read it. He looked at her. His expression moved through several things and settled into something that held both resignation and the knowledge that resignation was not going to change what happened next. You don't have to answer it, he said. I know. You've given enough. I know that too. She looked back toward the front of the room at Maya Brewer standing with a trident on her collar and 12 years of someone else's proof carried invisibly alongside her own. 12 operators, General. Same number as the coin. Klein was quiet. 12 names, she said. 4 on this coin didn't come home. 8 of us carried on. David carried his until Yemen. Marcus carried his until last month. I'm still carrying mine. She paused. If there are 12 more who need someone who doesn't officially exist, that's not a choice, that's arithmetic. She closed her hand around the coin. I'll need whatever intelligence exists, she said. 24 hours to assess whether it's viable or a one-way insertion. And if it's viable, then the people who can go are the people who were never there in the first place. 22 days later, in the early hours of a morning cold in the specific way of that altitude and latitude, 13 people moved across a line of terrain that had no designation in any document that could be requested through normal channels. 12 of them were operators. They had been held for 9 days in conditions designed to break them, and the conditions had not succeeded, though they had come close, and the evidence of how close was written on each of them in ways that would require weeks of recovery, and for some longer than that. The 13th person had gone in alone. She had gone in through a route the briefing materials described as high risk, and that she privately assessed as considerably worse than that. She went in carrying equipment that officially did not exist, using techniques developed in a unit that officially had never operated, relying on skills acquired in the service of a record that officially remained sealed. She got them out. When Klein met her at the debrief location, he looked at her for a moment without speaking. She was carrying new weight visible not in her posture, which was as controlled as it had always been, but in the quality of her stillness. The stillness of a person who has been through something that has added to the inventory of things requiring time to process it. Was 12 for 12, she said. 0 casualties. Klein nodded slowly. Welcome back, operator. Not back, sir, she said. Just not done yet. He looked at her with an expression that was by the standards of Major General Robert Klein warm. When are you ever done? Sarah considered that for a moment. When the coin runs out of names to carry, she said. 6 months after the night at the Officers Club, Sarah Calloway stood at the back of another graduation ceremony. Different room, different faces, a different season. California spring doing what California spring does, making everywhere look briefly like a place where difficult things might be possible. The light through the windows was clean and unhurried and made no demands. She stood with her hands in her pockets, the coin in her right hand, the worn edges of it moving slowly between her fingers the way they always moved in the quiet moments. The meditative turning of an object that has become so familiar, it is almost part of the hand itself. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. She read what was on it. She stood there for a moment in the clean morning light, in a room full of people who had earned the right to be in it, at the back where she had always preferred to be, and she breathed. Then she put the phone back in her pocket without answering. Not yet. The ceremony was still going. Some things could wait 5 minutes. There are 12 names on that coin. 4 of them belong to people who will never appear in any record. A family member can request any database. A historian can search any wall the public can visit and stand before in the specific silence of acknowledgement. They served in places that do not exist officially, in operations that did not happen officially, in defense of people who will live their entire lives without knowing that anything needed defending. Does the fact that no one can know their names make what they did matter less or more? The question does not have an answer that fits neatly anywhere we put things we want to keep. It does not resolve into a sentence or a ceremony or a public record. It lives instead in the worn edges of a small metal disc in the hands of the people who carry it, in the particular weight of a thing that costs more than it shows. Sarah Calloway carries it in her pocket. And some nights, in the hours between last call and first light, she takes it out and holds it in both hands and turns it over in the dark and thinks about the weight of what cannot be told. She finds to her own continued mild surprise that the weight is bearable, not because it is light, because she is not carrying it alone.